All right, everyone. Here we go again. This is part two of day one of module one. And I do want to say not every day of the module is going to be this long. You've listened to me talk a great deal today if you have done the orientation module and the two sections of this module. There's a lot of setup with the course going on. As we go forward, not every day is going to be this long. So anyway, we'll proceed. Before we go on, you should download the Chapter 2 Workshop 2. So this is Day 1B. You already did Day 1A, I guess, which was the goal setting. But you're going to need the balance sheet and net worth table, as well as this information here that we're going to be using for our workshop. In addition, when I go through the lecture, I'm going to be referencing an example from Jerry and Liz Saunders. So this is also downloadable on Georgia View. Just to remind you all, since it's early in the course, where we're getting this from. If you want to, let me be a student here. If you want to go to our webpage, our course page, you'll go to the module section. You'll click to our day. You have our checklist, of course. You've watched the video. Here's where all the stuff is for the lecture and workshops. You'll see a host of lecture material. The video lectures there we can listen to. I'm filming part 2 now. This is part 1. The slides that you're seeing in my lecture will be there. And then any supporting materials for the lecture will all be in the lecture material. So you could download that right now so you can help follow along during the lecture. In addition, there's your workshop materials. Goals, we've already done that, and the balance sheet. All right. So get rid of that and go to our slides. So we have been talking about the early stages of financial planning, the first of which was goal setting. After that, we want to get a snapshot of where we are today financially, and that is the personal balance sheet. Tomorrow's discussion will be on income and expense sheet and budget, and that's kind of like the where do we go from here step, the forward planning step. But today is all about where do we sit today with the personal balance sheet. So the balance sheet describes a financial position at a given point in time. It is what's called a financial snapshot. So this is the balance sheet for Jerry and Liz Saunders. This is what you have downloaded. And I want you to pay attention to the 3 parts of this balance sheet. First of all, people have assets. And these assets are broken up into parts. But generally, the way I want you to think about your assets is anything that you can turn into cash, right? Anything that can be sold and turned into money, the value of that. Obviously, cash is already cash. These things up here are called liquid assets because they're very easily turned to cash, if not cash already. So you'll see cash on hand, the balances in your checking and savings accounts, even short-term CDs, money market funds, and deposits. Another type of assets is investments, stocks and bonds, things that you have purchased to hopefully earn additional income. Lower down, we have real property. So you notice as we move down, things are getting less and less liquid. Easily turned into cash, takes a little bit to turn it into cash. Real property, difficult to turn into cash, right? You have to list your house, your primary residence to sell it. It could not sell for a long time, so it's hard to turn these things into cash. So real property, and then personal property, cars, jewelry, furniture. All these things are things that you own, and if we could liquidate all these things, it would be a big pile of cash. The next thing on the balance sheet is your liabilities. So we see over here liabilities. Same sort of scenario. We have liquid, or I wouldn't say liquid, but current liabilities. And these are ones that are going to demand cash in a short amount of time. I'll expand on these later. But usually you think about liquid assets corresponding to current liabilities because you use your cash and checking account to pay off things that are going to be due in the short run. But then we have long-term liabilities as well, which are balances on large ticket items like our mortgage, right? We might owe a lot of money on a mortgage, have a high balance there. Auto loans. We got a furniture loan, student loans, right? We might have loans from our parents that we have to pay them back. All these things represent a claim to our pile of cash. So when I think about assets, I want to think about all these things I could turn into a big pile of money. And when I think about liabilities, I want to think about a line of people representing my debts, my mortgage holder, my auto loan holder, my parents, all standing in line to come take their money out of my pile. What's left over is referred to as my net worth. How much do I have in excess of my liabilities? In other words, if people came and took everything that I owed, people that I owed came and took all their money out, would there be any money left over in the pile? And so we think of that as being a measure of financial health or financial well-being. Of course, if you have more liabilities, more people standing in line to take your money than you have money in the pile, you're going to be insolvent. So today's lesson, or the second part of this lesson, is all about the balance sheet. So let's see how much you already know. We're going to start with assets. Let's see how much you already know about the different types of assets. I've listed 4 here: real property, investments, liquid assets, and none of these. Well, 3 and none of these. So read these. Are they real property, investments, liquid assets, or do they not really fall into either of these categories? And there is a trick in here. I want to see if you catch the trick. Assets such as stocks, bonds, mutual funds, red Honda Civic you leased this summer, the money in your checking account, tangible assets that are immovable. I want you to think about that as a dwelling or a piece of land, or a piece of real estate rather, and then land. So take a minute if you need to pause the video to try to think of those. Okay, obviously these sound like investments, right? Stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Real estate can be considered real property, or it can be considered an investment, right? If you invest in real estate to make a return rather than provide a service. The red Honda Civic is actually none of these. And so that's the trick. We'll talk about this in a minute. But remember how I said assets are things that you could turn into money to help pay off your liabilities? If you lease something, you don't own it. So you can't sell the red Honda Civic you're leasing. That is the property of the dealership. The money in your checking account is a liquid asset, right? That is cash that you can readily spend. Real property is a tangible asset that is immovable. And I guess land, I categorize as A or B, because it depends on how you think about it. Yes, it could be real property. It could also be an investment depending on what we're using it for. So how does this break down? Let's look at the actual definitions. If you nailed it, then this is going to be easy for you. So people tend to hold about 50% of their assets in real property. These are tangible, immovable properties, land, and anything fixed to it, like your house. Personal property represents about 10%. So these are movable assets like cars, boats, and jewelry. Then we got 40% that is in investments and liquid assets, so the more liquid type of assets. These investments are categorized by acquisitions that you hope earn a return rather than provide a service, right? So bonds or real estate. A house would not be an investment per se if you were not seeking a return out of it. Then you have your liquid assets, which are things that were readily converted into cash. So let's think about recording and measuring an asset, because I tried to throw that trick at you earlier. It's an asset if it can eventually be turned into cash. So you include an asset even if it's financed with debt. And that seems weird because you're like, well, I borrowed it, so I don't technically own it yet. I don't necessarily have the deed. I still have to pay for it. But if you, again, think about what we're trying to measure in your net worth. You could sell that car to somebody, turn it into cash, and pay off your debt. If we didn't list the asset but only listed the debt, then we would be overstating our liabilities. Instead, if we also only listed the asset, we only listed the car, and didn't list our debt balance on it, we would be overstating our net worth. We want to get a measure of our residual assets. So what's left over after we pay the people we own money. So if you buy it with debt, you put the market value of the asset on the other side, on the asset column. That means leased assets are not owned and don't belong on the balance sheet. So think about this. Why would you not list your apartment as an asset? Well, I guess some students here like to say I could sublet it. That's potentially true and potentially illegal. But you can't sell your apartment. And so it doesn't represent an asset to you. It cannot be turned to cash. And that subletting is actually a payment. And we don't list interest payments, or we don't list potential payments as an asset because they might not actually come to fruition. You need to only list things that can be turned into cash, not potential cash amounts. Another example. You buy a car for $30,000. The minute you drive it off the lot, you sell it for $27,500. What do you put on your balance sheet? The 30 or the 27.5? Well, you would only list the 27.5 as an asset. If you borrowed to buy the car at 30,000, of course, that would be your loan balance until you make some payments. So assets are listed at what's called their fair market value. That means what you could sell it for today, the actual value of the asset, what somebody would pay for it to take it off your hands. So here we go. In total, we have studied assets and how to measure them. So I want you to take a try. Look at your workshop. I'm going to back out of here, and we're going to try to fill in Jackie's asset column. So here we go. There's your balance sheet, and here's Jackie's assets. Assets and liabilities. So blended in here are different types of assets and liabilities. You should go through and label each one of these as a liquid asset, as investment, as personal property, or as real property. I'll help you out with one. Down here, we see a condo and property value and a condo mortgage loan, right? Condo and property, think about what type of asset that would be. Definitely not liquid. It's not personal property. That one would probably be a real property asset. Find all the things that she could turn into cash and label them as assets, and then come up here and put them in her asset column and total up her total assets. Go ahead and pause the video and do that now before we proceed. Okay, now we're going to be thinking about debt. So debt is the other side, right? Debt is a liability. And so these can be credit card charges, they can be student loans, mortgages, but usually these debts correspond to an asset on the other side. We classify the liabilities by duration. So our current liability is a liability that's due within 1 year. These can be thought of mostly as our regular payments, bills outstanding on the month. So suppose you have your mortgage and you haven't paid it yet. Well, if we take a look at Jerry and Liz Saunders' balance sheet, we can see they haven't paid their utilities bill yet. We would want to list that as a liability because if we didn't, we would still have that money in our checking account and we would be overstating our net worth. You get revolving payments into your checking account from income from work, and you get revolving liabilities that show up from bills. Every time you get a bill, it should be listed until it's paid, and then once we pay it, there's actually no net change to net worth. Your checking account goes down by the appropriate amount, and your liabilities go down by the appropriate amount. Then we also have our long-term liabilities, which are balances that are due 1 year or more from the date. This is your mortgage. You're not going to pay off your mortgage, your entire mortgage in 1 year. If you look at the Saunders, there's about $160,000. So this is one where you're going to make level payments over time. What's interesting about the relationship between short and long run debt is that due to student loans, um, there is more money outstanding in student loan debt than there are credit card debt. And that occurred around 2010, the first quarter. So since 2010, the biggest debt problem facing young people is no longer credit cards. It is also student loans. One big rule with debts is to not include the original amount borrowed for the loan. You only include the latest balance. And this should make sense, but you think about how much claim is on that big pile of money of yours, and that is only what you have left to pay. So do not include the original balance, only include the latest balance. All right, so we've studied liabilities. And you can see there's several different types of liabilities over here. Utilities, rent, insurance, taxes, banking credit card balances, department store credit card balances, etc. The long-term liabilities, mortgage, auto loans, appliance, and furniture loans. Jackie has some of these things too. So take a minute, pause the video, find Jackie's liabilities and put them in the appropriate location on the balance sheet. And then at this point, you should be able to compute Jackie's net worth. All right, net worth is the bottom line calculation. We take our assets minus our liabilities, and we are technically insolvent if our net worth is negative. Now, having a negative net worth can indicate poor financial planning, because you have you've taken out too many liabilities and you don't have enough assets to cover them. Now, one big difference is young people graduating with perhaps a lot of student debt or a lot of startup costs from a new house are probably going to have debts that exceed their current level of assets. And until they pay down some of those debts, like their student loan, they're just not going to have a lot of net worth. So, although it can indicate poor financial planning, it can also indicate a person who is just starting out. But when you get your first job and you start making income, your first reaction is going to be to start buying a bunch of things. But I'm going to warn you, do not be Stanley Johnson. Let's go back and find Stanley. There's Stanley.
I'm Stanley Johnson. I've got a great family. I've got a 4-bedroom house and a great community. Like my car? It's new. I even belong to the local golf club. How do I do it? I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. I can barely pay my finance charges. Somebody help me.
Need a smart way to consolidate your debt? At LendingTree.com, banks compete, and you choose the loan that's right for you.
All right. Little free advertisement there for LendingTree, but don't be Stanley. Stanley probably made a lot of money to begin with and then bought too much stuff on debt with his good credit, and now he's just not solvent anymore. He can't afford to keep up with his liabilities. What does it look like in the world? Well, if you look at individuals' net worth by age, it's kind of exactly what I talked about. People younger than the age of 35 really don't have a lot of net worth, $6,000 to the good, and that's on average. The average person has about $68,000 to the good, but when you think about where that's concentrated, all these people who've been saving and saving and saving for retirement that have a whole lot of assets and no liabilities are pulling that average up. So for the working class, or the people, I would say the working class, the working aged Americans, you're not going to have a lot of net worth in the beginning. But as you pay down your debts, that will go up. All right, so we've pretty much completed the workshops for today. Your last thing to do is compute Jackie's net worth and answer the questions on the bottom. Is Jackie solvent? You can see that. And I want you to take a look at her current assets and liabilities and comment on the relationship between solvency and liquidity. Just give a few sentences there. You're going to type this up. So this is our first time submitting workshops. Type these answers directly into the Word document, and as well as your goals from above. And Then you will come over here to Georgia View, drop down to our assignments tab, and you will see Module 1, Day 1, May 8th, starting 8 a.m. You will be able to turn in your workshop for that day there. Okay, so you'll upload that to the assignments folder. What I would like for you to do is please, I can type this directly here. So what I'd like for you to do is please name your file workshop mod, with your last name. So mine will be Roush, your first initial J, underscore workshop Mod1Day1. Whatever the workshop title is. So do this for all of them. Your last name, your first initial, and the title of the workshop when you upload it. So you're going to have one that does this and says 1 and one that does this and says B. Upload them both to the assignments tab. All right, that's the lectures. So after this, you have a discussion to do. And so you'll see that that discussion is on a short video about student loans. About 40% of students are not paying back their loans as of 2016. So you'll take a look at that in the discussions tab. There is not a homework assigned yet. That homework will first be assigned tomorrow. So that's all you have to do to catch up today is make sure you get the worksheets done. And then you might read ahead for tomorrow.